When you hear the words financial bubble, what's the first thing you think of? The dot-com bust? Crypto, maybe? Well, the original cautionary tale, the OG of all market bubbles, was all about tulips. Yeah, flowers. But what if I told you the legendary story of Tulip Mania, this epic tale of fortunes made and lost over a plant, is mostly myth? Let's dig in and find out what really happened.
Okay, look at this number, 3,000 guilders. Right now it's just a number on a screen, right? But back in 17th century Holland, this number was, well, it was an absolutely staggering amount of money. Because that was the price of one single tulip bulb in 1637. To put that into perspective for you, a skilled craftsman, someone making a good living, would have to work for almost 10 years straight to afford one. Think about that. A whole decade of your life for a flower bulb. And this was the holy grail, the Semper Augustus. Just look at it. Those incredible flame-like red streaks made it the most famous, the most desirable, and the most expensive tulip of them all. This one flower became the face of what we now call the world's first great financial bubble. So let's start with that legend, the dramatic, blockbuster version of the story that's been passed down for centuries, a story of greed, madness, and total economic meltdown. This quote here really sums up the popular image. It's from a Scottish journalist named Charles Mackay, who wrote a book about it back in 1841. And the picture he paints is just wild. He claims that everyone in Dutch society, from the richest nobles down to the poorest servants, was completely obsessed with tulips. To really drive home just how crazy the prices supposedly got, check out this famous list of goods. The story goes that people were trading things like 4 oxen, 1,000 pounds of cheese, even their own bed, all for one single viceroy tulip bulb. The legend tells us that prices were just completely unhinged from reality. And it gets even crazier. Mackay claimed that at the absolute peak, one Semper Augustus bulb was sold for 12 acres of prime land. I mean, it just sounds like pure irrational madness. But what started it all? Why on earth did these flowers become so valuable in the first place? Well, see, in the Dutch Golden Age, a time of incredible prosperity, tulips weren't just pretty. They were a brand new cutting-edge status symbol. They were totally exotic, arriving from the Ottoman Empire and unlike anything Europeans had ever seen. For the newly wealthy Dutch merchants, they became the ultimate luxury item. It was really the perfect storm, a ton of new money floating around, and a beautiful, rare new thing to spend it on to show off your wealth. But the real obsession, the thing that drove people absolutely wild, was a specific type known as broken tulips. These were the ones with those stunning, unpredictable, multicolored patterns that looked like flames dancing on the petals. They were by far the most prized of all. And here's the secret, the absolute kicker, that breathtaking beauty, the very thing that made these bulbs worth a fortune, it was caused by a disease. A virus would infect the bulb, breaking its solid color into those wild, beautiful streaks. This also made them incredibly rare and super hard to reproduce, which of course just made their price shoot up even higher. So you have this incredible rarity, this intense beauty, and a sky-high demand. It created this frenzied, superheated market that, as the legend goes, was just destined to come crashing down. At the very peak of the mania, get this, people weren't even trading the actual flower bulbs anymore. They were gathering in taverns, trading paper contracts for bulbs that were still sitting in the frozen ground. They called it windhandel, or wind trade. It was basically an early futures market, where people were just gambling on the future price of a flower they hadn't even seen. And then it happened. February 1637. The party came to a sudden, screeching halt. It was like a switch flipped. Buyers just stopped showing up to auctions. The confidence that had fueled the whole thing, it evaporated, literally overnight. People who were holding contracts worth a house one day woke up to find they were completely worthless the next. The bubble had burst, and according to legend, it left total financial ruin in its wake. But this is where our story takes a huge twist. Because that dramatic tale of an entire nation brought to its knees by a flower, well, it might just be one of history's greatest fish stories. Modern historians tell a very, very different tale.
So, in recent decades, historians and economists have gone back and actually dug into the original 17th century records. And what they found paints a much, much less traumatic picture.
So let's compare. The myth says an entire nation was gripped by madness. But the reality? Historian Anne Goldgar found that the trading was mostly limited to a pretty small circle of wealthy merchants and artisans. The myth talks about a devastating crash that wrecked the economy. The reality? The Dutch national economy barely even noticed. The difference between the legend and the facts is just huge. In fact, Goldgar's research can only find evidence of maybe 4 or 5 people who got into serious financial trouble from the crash. So where did this story of widespread ruin come from? Mostly from satirical pamphlets written at the time to make fun of the traders. And, of course, from Mackay's book, a dramatic retelling written a full 200 years after it all happened. Okay, so if it wasn't just madness, what explains those crazy prices? Well, economist Earl Thompson came up with a pretty compelling rational explanation. See, the government was about to change the law. Originally, these win trade contracts were binding. If you promised to buy, you had to pay up. But a new rule was coming that would let buyers walk away from the deal by paying a tiny penalty, just 3.5%. This basically turned a risky purchase into a low-risk bet. The potential upside was huge and the downside was tiny. So you could argue the prices skyrocketed for perfectly logical reasons. And once that new rule became official, the game was over and the market collapsed. So if Tulip Mania wasn't this massive nationwide disaster that the stories make it out to be, then why is it still one of the most famous events in economic history? Why do we all know about it? The answer is pretty simple. It's an amazing metaphor. The story is just too good. The term Tulip Mania gets thrown around all the time to describe modern bubbles, from the dot-com boom all the way to cryptocurrency. It's become the perfect, simple shorthand for markets getting way ahead of themselves. So the story has survived all these centuries, not because it's a super accurate piece of economic history, but because it's a powerful moral lesson. It's this timeless cautionary tale about greed, foolishness, and what can happen when crowds get carried away. And that's why getting the real story is so important. It shows us how easily a simple, compelling narrative can completely overshadow the complicated truth. And that really leaves us with one last question to think about. Does the incredible legend of Tulip Mania tell us more about what actually happened in the 17th century, or does it tell us more about our own timeless human need for a good story, especially a cautionary tale that we feel compelled to tell over and over again? Thanks for tuning in to this explainer.